Hello, everybody. Hello, Chris.
Hey.
Chris Sauber and Dan Sfera on doing the April 2020 webinar. And how sites can maintain during a lockdown and thrive in the second half of 2020. And by the way, okay, the slides are here, but all of you guys, I'm going to put in the chat. We do a daily. This is how we're thriving during the coronavirus, okay? We have a daily Guru Nation quarantine meetup every day, including today at 2 Pacific, which is 5 Eastern time, every day, Monday through Friday. I'm putting the link in the chat for those of you that are not called in. You can get the link, and then for those that are called in, just go to any of my recent YouTube videos, and you'll see the link. Join Daily Quarantine Meetup. It will work best with computer, not with the app.
And is this meeting free to join?
Yeah, it's free. We're just doing this every day just to network with people. Actually, I've gotten really good ideas for myself. You missed yesterday, but I got a really good idea yesterday from, we kind of brainstormed the idea, basically interviewing physicians as part of a podcast. And we're going to start doing that. I mean, we're already headed down that road with the clinical scoop. So
right.
The point is, you're going to get good ideas from there. You're going to network with people, and, you know, these relationships could last even beyond the lockdown, which is going to end soon. So, yeah, as always, leave your questions in the chat. As always, the replay will be sent to you if you are registered, and it's also going to go on YouTube. And hello to all the podcast listeners. If you want to see the slides, you either got to register for the next webinar, all right, which you got to be an email subscriber, or just go on YouTube and click on playlists, and that's where we have our webinars. So anyways, Chris, thanks for coming on, man. How can sites maintain during the lockdown?
Well, we're gonna cover that with this webinar, aren't we?
Right, but like, what are we doing for our sites? Forget about the webinar for a second. Just like, what are we doing with our sites?
Well, I don't know if our sites, the ones that we own, are a good example in terms of kind of the standard in the industry, because we primarily focus on psychiatric studies, and those are significantly different than a typical, I don't even know how to explain, like a general practice type study where, you know, there's lots of physical evaluations and things of that nature. Most of what can be done in a psych study can be done over the phone if necessary, which we're doing at one of our sites. And it was your idea to do this, which was an excellent idea, was to see the patients over the phone.
Right. Yeah, telehealth. Do as many of the assessments as you can, because they're all like verbal questions that, you know, verbal questionnaires, which are what's called rating scales in psychiatry. So it's like these scripted, sometimes hour-long interviews, sometimes even longer than an hour. So you can actually do these things over the phone or through a telehealth system, like a Zoom, you know, but Zoom is not HIPAA compliant, so you got to stick to the phone or use one of our solutions, actually. We can talk about it later, but yeah, that's basically what we're doing. We're both expecting a very good second half of the year for clinical research, a lot of pent-up demand. So let's get right into the slides. Are you following along too, Chris?
I will.
Slide 2, common reasons that sites struggle and what to do about it. So this is, you know, a lot of this is going to focus on coronavirus, but it's really a bigger picture. It's really, how can sites thrive in good and bad times? Okay. And I don't even know if we're in necessarily a bad time right now in research. Like 2008 was really a bad time in research.
Well, I would say for those sites that aren't performing psychiatric studies that, you know, need to see their patients in person for every visit, I would lean towards this as a kind of a bad or lean time because they can't see their patients, can't conduct the study visits.
Yeah, but we were talking in about how, on these quarantine meetups, about how 2008 was so different from this,
Oh,
I
of
guess,
course.
economic downturn. I mean, we were losing studies back then. Like every study we had, we were losing. Right now, and there was no feasibility questionnaires in sight. Like no,
Sure.
you had to wait like 4 months, 5 months to see your next feasibility questionnaire.
There
During
was
this,
no light at the end of the tunnel then. Here you
none.
have one. When the pandemic's over, you can see the light. That's it, right?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this in the last webinar. Like, yeah, we're everyone's on lockdown, shelter in place, but and a lot of states are starting to open up. But you've been seeing feasibility questionnaires and new studies, and no studies have been canceled because of this, at least from our sites. I mean, I'm sure there have been studies, but those studies were going to cancel anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And coronavirus was just the catalyst. So, this webinar is going to be about good and bad times in research. So let's go to slide 3. Typical reasons that sites struggle. Okay, and again, in any environment, not just coronavirus. Sites may be struggling due to a lack of PI involvement, lack of patient enrollment, lack of studies. This is true. These are the 3 things that are absolutely critical that you need to have a healthy business. And you need all 3. You can't just have 2 of the 3 or 1 of the 3. You need all 3 to be working together.
So if you had to itemize those in order of importance, what would you say is first and utmost important there of those 3?
Probably, well, it's hard. It's hard to rank it because they all work together.
Of course. But
I mean, you really can't have one without the other, but I would say patient enrollment.
well, you can't really enroll patients if you don't have a study, though.
Right, but see, if you get a study and you don't have patients, you're just delaying your problem.
Of course.
Because what good does it do to have a study? You can have 100 studies at your site. You're not enrolling any patients. Guess what? You're paying your staff to do a lot of regulatory work and answer calls from a lot of angry sponsors.
Okay. So would you say the least important of those 3 is lack of PI involvement or PI involvement?
In the short term, yes. In the long term, that might be the biggest, most important factor.
Yeah?
Yeah, in the long run. See,
Okay.
you can look at problems from micro and macro. But all 3 of these, you really need all of them. I mean, to work together.
Of
You can't
course.
really have one without the other.
Of course.
And in the long run, you need the PI involvement more than anything because that's going to help you get studies and patients. Have
Mm-hmm.
good PI involvement.
Absolutely. You can access their database, and maybe it's not even necessary for you to access it. The PI is doing that for you, pushing the studies on their patients for you.
That's right. Or having their colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
refer
Help with
patients.
enrollment. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so site owners need to keep their 4 main stakeholders. Okay, these are patients, employees, which is not in the one of the 3 things that sites struggle with, interestingly, PIs, and sponsors. These are the 4 stakeholders you need to keep happy. As you can see from above, most sites don't struggle because of a lack of employees. Yeah, I think this is true. I mean, of course, the coordinator is everything, but the site owner can serve as a coordinator. You can bring on coordinators. If you have studies and patients, you can hire more staff. The problem is getting that initial cash flow going. So these are the 4 stakeholders you need to keep happy in any market, good or bad. Okay. Now, what to do when your business is slowing down? Okay. Well, you can increase your business development. You can have someone like BSCS do that for you if you want, or in addition to what you're doing. Basically, you need to spend, what was the rule? At least 5 hours a week, Chris? Like an hour a day?
Yeah.
An hour a day on clinicaltrials.gov, LinkedIn. It's basically those 2 things. I mean,
Well, I would say if you're slow, I mean, because we were just generalizing with this rule, but I would say if your site, if you are you're the site owner and you're only one responsible for business development, I would say the majority of your time should be spent on bringing on or working on business development. I think what we were stating when we said 5 hours a week, it was if you're hiring outside services to work on business development, like DSCS, it's still best if you put in at least 5 hours a week as well, to work on the follow-ups of the studies that are provided to you, and then access additional sources for business development. I think that's what we were discussing when we helped Carlos create these slides.
Yeah, I think the 1 hour a day is just like a good habit to do in good or bad times.
Yep.
But if you're really struggling and like your business depends on you getting a study, I mean, you better do like 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day
Exactly.
until you get a study, because they're out there. And right
Yep.
now, again, 2020 is not 2008. I've been in the industry. I'm glad I was in the industry now through two, somewhat a slow or lean times. Although this is going to be a very micro lean time, I think. I see. I mean, we both see the studies in the pipeline, and we see the studies starting in summer and fall. There's a lot of them, right?
Yep.
In 2008, when the hammer fell, things didn't recover until like late 2009, maybe 2010.
Or even later.
Bad.
Even later. I mean, I would say even later than that. I mean, yes, it recovered so where you could see studies coming, but they were still kind of slow, right? I mean, nothing like it was prior to 2008. I mean,
yeah, here you're going to see like a quick recovery.
Yep.
At least we think. I mean, look, everything's pointing in that direction at least for clinical research. I don't know about the economy as a whole. That's not what this webinar is about. The clinical research, we seem to be actually fairly, at least pandemic proof. That's for sure. The one thing that has happened during this coronavirus is it really exposed the need to do more things virtually if possible.
Mm-hmm.
Which, we've actually built a business now, a startup around that through the Clinical Scoop, which is one of the ways we've pivoted.
Right.
But basically, look, go on clinicaltrials.gov, aim for like 100, like where it says applications here. What I mean by that is sending out emails, okay, 100 per day. Most of them are going to ignore you, but you really only need that 1% to convert for you, okay? Spend a modest amount of time on them. And, of course, it's better if you research who you're emailing, but it's not necessary. I mean, volume wins in this case. You're basically looking for the studies that are looking for sites. You don't know which ones those are, so you just got to go at volume, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so now, slide 5, okay, what site owners can do to maintain their sites during the COVID-19 pandemic. And thankfully, it looks like it's almost over, at least the worst part of it. So research is pandemic proof. Okay? If anything, we've seen, yes, the way we do conduct the business needs to change, but there's more studies now. And most of the new studies are coronavirus studies. And guess what? They still need investigators. They still need CRAs. They still need coordinators. All that stuff, all the fundamentals that we talk about, it's still needed. Okay, so coronavirus has shown we are pandemic proof, at least for those that can adapt to this new environment. I mean, we talked the last webinar about, revising our SOPs to allow for telehealth, right?
Yep.
The FDA released guidance on that. So you guys need to be thinking outside the box during these kind of things, right? Like there's a time for normal in the box thinking during normal times. You can kind of be on autopilot. And this is not the time to be on autopilot because things are just uncertain. Everything's uncertain. So you got to always look for where there's problems, there's opportunities. So clinical research obviously has slowed down as far as patient visits. I mean, as much as we wish we can do all telehealth visits, we just can't. Like, it's just not feasible sometimes. And some patients, understandably, just want to drop out. So, and you're not going to get new screenings right now unless you have e-consent, which 99% of sites don't use, right? So, it's slowed down, but it's expected to pick right back up. I'm expecting a V-shaped recovery for clinical research, at least. Clinical research and healthcare in general, typically well insulated from recessions. And let's not also forget, clinical research had a fairly negative stigma before coronavirus. And I think now that clinical research is in the headlines more and more, I mean, it's like probably the biggest headlines every day is like, clinical research, like top 5 headlines.
Sure, looking for vaccines, looking for treatments for coronavirus. Absolutely.
Yeah, so the average Joe now understands more, hey, okay, what's clinical research like? This is okay, they're doing studies. This seems to be important. So I think the stigma around clinical research is going to change after this. And that could be good. That could make it easier to get study participants when things get back to normal-ish.
Yeah, I don't know if I absolutely agree with that last bullet point there on slide 6. I don't know if that's true. Research is well insulated from recessions. I mean, when the stock market crashes, typically so does research.
Right. Yeah. We just said 08 was, nothing was well insulated. But I think what Carlos meant here is clinical research was still and healthcare in general was still one of the better sectors, even then.
Oh, of course.
And, things just felt like things bottomed out in all industries. Of course, clinical research was right there, but it wasn't quite as bad as the other ones. But I would say it's pandemic-proof, not recession-proof. Nothing's recession-proof.
There you go.
But it's well insulated. It is well insulated from recession. That's fair enough by Carlos. Fair enough point. Of course, having the context of us talking on the webinar helps. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because don't be confused, guys. Like, we're not immune to recessions. But the fact of the matter is, this is not really. I mean, it is a recession in the sense that it's like it wasn't a naturally occurring recession, right? Like, usually recessions occur because the market has them occur. And this, if you want to call what we're in a recession, that's fine. I don't think anyone's going to argue. But this is a little bit different because it was brought on it was mandated basically to shut down economic activity.
Right.
This would have not happened without, right. Like, this would have not happened without coronavirus. I mean, maybe in like a few years, you and I before coronavirus kept talking about, hey, be prepared for the next recession. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be ugly.
Yep.
Maybe this just catalyzed it, but it looks like, fortunately, and I'm knocking on wood, clinical research is going to be okay during this one.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the furloughs, I know CRAs and coordinators are getting furloughed. These guys will get jobs again in 2 months, tops. If they're experienced CRAs and experienced coordinators, they're not going to be furloughed or unemployed very long. And those companies that are furloughing them are risking them going to another company.
Right. Yep, completely agree.
All right, next slide, 7. The sites are facing new problems during this pandemic. So most studies are on a screening hold. This is true. Okay. But there are a few studies that are screening. And
yeah. Yeah, COVID studies are screening, aren't they?
COVID studies are screening, but also studies where, like cancer, for example.
Sure.
Like oncology. I mean, these patients need, like in oncology, these patients need these treatment alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing else for them. So it's all about patient motivation. And sure, maybe a patient's going to put off like an acne study because they don't feel comfortable going to a clinic right now. But they're not putting off a breast cancer study if there's a promising treatment that their doctor tells them is promising, right?
Right.
Same thing with any other serious medical condition. So, this is what we're seeing now. Most sites are on a screening hold, but like you said, there are some that are not. Coronavirus studies are those as well. And understandably, some patients don't want to go to their scheduled visits. But, Chris, on these daily guru meetups we're doing, we're actually hearing from a lot of sites that their patients, that this is not true, that patients are not afraid to come to the sites right now.
Oh, sure. I mean, you haven't been a Breakthrough for a while, but there's not a patient there that's apprehensive about coming to their in-person visits. They're all coming.
Right, yeah. I think I forgot how to even get there at this point.
Yeah, right?
So, some patients don't want to go to their scheduled visits, of course, and
Right.
there's going to be ones that are at higher risk of going outside. And, we're just coming off of the peak now as far as the infections and deaths. So it's understandable that people don't want to go out yet. But again, this is end of April. I think by the end of May, it's going to be very different for a lot of people, even the most vulnerable populations. I think they'll be willing to go to the sites. But here's the good news, though, even right now. Fortunately, sponsors are willing to work with sites. So we have yet to have a sponsor shoot down an idea. Like hey, let's implement telehealth. Hey, let's do the PANs over the phone.
Yep.
Hey, let's have the assisted living facility do the vital signs on the patients. I mean, they're okay with all of this. You just need to have an SOP in place. If you're a DSCS client, you already got one. And then think outside the box. Now is the time to think outside the box.
Yeah. Just have to get a sponsor to approve whatever it is you're thinking of.
That's right. And basically the FDA basically approved anything that's reasonable and keep patients safe with their COVID-19 guidance that they had. Actually, the FDA was quick in releasing that guidance.
Yeah, and thus sponsors are very flexible on what they'll allow sites to do.
Yep. So here, next slide, 8. So maintaining your business during crisis, maintaining your business afloat, keeping your business afloat during the crisis. So one of the first things that sites should do, and it's really during any crisis, but again, we're living in 2020, so we're talking about this one, but it really applies to anything in the future also, okay? One of the first things that sites should do is increase the overhead on the study budgets. Okay, if you've seen our SOP, you'll know why. All right, and that's because there's a lot of extra costs for sites. The sites don't have the infrastructure to sanitize before and after every patient visit to the extent that we're doing now. The sites don't have to worry about, okay, we need to take our scrubs to hospital-grade cleaners for the staff scrubs. The sites typically don't have to worry about scanning documents so that the monitors can monitor the source, right? But these are things that sites are needing to do now to keep their businesses going. Because like something as simple as scanning documents could be the difference between a site getting paid or not getting paid during this time. Because usually site payments are triggered by monitor visits, right?
Yep.
So this is important. I mean, you need to ask for overhead increases. Several participants are part of the vulnerable populations and should be protected by taking precautions. For example, in our SOP, I think the age was 60 or 65, that they just weren't coming into the office. Like we were just doing all telehealth visits. So, use your judgment. This is where, like we were talking about, how important is it that the PI is involved. I mean, this is a case where it's very important because they're the clinician, so they understand this thing better than you or I.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so revise your SOP. Sites are encouraged to apply to as many new studies as possible and prepare for upcoming months, which are expected to be busy. Sites should also stay in touch with active patients even if they don't have scheduled visits. And also tracking the AEs. I mean, thankfully, not as many people came down with coronavirus as the initial projections. I think it's 10 times less than the initial projections when this started. So thankfully, we've seen 10 times less AEs, at least related to coronavirus. But still, you need to keep in touch with the patients to see what their symptoms are, to see if they're still willing to be in the study, or maybe if you have a study coming up soon, see if they're willing to be in that one, okay? And this is something Chris and I, the next slide, virtual trials. This is something Chris and I with DSCS are working on right now. We're pitching. I didn't do anything Friday or yesterday. Yesterday I put on LinkedIn our slide deck for this, but DSCS, as a response to the industry and to coronavirus, we've thought of ways to make hybrid virtual trials for the studies we already have for our own sites. But now we thought, hey, you know what? Like, if we're using this solution, why don't we let others have this solution too? So we've built through the Clinical Scoop a full telehealth system with video chat so you can see patients in their home. And then we have a network of phlebotomists and mobile healthcare workers that will go visit the patients in their homes, draw blood, do EKGs, do vital signs, distribute the investigational product. I mean, we have medical assistants, nurses, infusion nurses if needed. So we have the infrastructure set up, and we're using it for our studies, but that's small. So we wanted to make a whole new company out of this. And I really think, this is what sites should be doing, not necessarily using this idea because it's not easy to do, but and then we're going to get to the questions right now. Put your questions in the chat, guys. We're going to read them now. But like, the point of this is think outside the box. Like, usually where there's problems, there's opportunities. And usually if you're solving a problem at your site or at your CRO, chances are there's other sites or other CROs dealing with the same problems, and they need solutions. So this is where sites can really kind of vertically integrate. Because of our sites, we saw this problem and we said, hey, here's the solution. And oh, by the way, sponsor, we can also facilitate your monitoring, which is related to our next question. So this is James. I am a monitor and just completed remote SDV for a study due to the fact that I cannot make it to the site due to coronavirus, but some of my sites would not send me redacted source unless they get paid, since remote SDV was not part of the executed CTA. So exactly, James. In addition to, our virtual trial solution, in addition to sending the healthcare workers to patient homes, we send one of our own staff members from DSCS. We have people all across the country. We send somebody to each site to go scan their documents, redacted documents, and upload them to a virtual workspace. We have it all set up. So the sites, I understand they don't want to get paid. This is like extra work for them. They should have negotiated their overhead, but even if they did, it's still things that they don't want to do. So we can take that away from them and say, hey, we'll have somebody go to your site if you give us permission. They'll do all the scanning. And then you tell us who your CRA is, and we'll give them access for 24 hours, 48 hours, however long they need. So James says, you are right about how sites can increase their overhead during coronavirus. That's right. Exactly right. But also about the full solution that DSCS is doing. Not just how to see patients virtually, but how to allow monitoring, how to facilitate monitoring virtually. We take care of all of that. So James, if your sponsor or CRO, if they're having this issue, they need to contact us. Please have them contact us because we have the solution for them.
Yes, we do.
And it will be like our first project, so we won't even charge a lot. Like we're probably going to do it at cost. Charge what it costs us. Okay, the second half of 2020. So the light at the end of the tunnel. Carlos's slides. This is apparently an old meme. Carlos is using it. It's an avocado slice in half. You're my better half. Okay. Good job, Carlos. So, second half, slide 12. Okay, what to expect after the lockdown. And again, nobody knows. Thankfully, the pandemic wasn't as bad as initial projections. I mean, it's still horrible. You know, people died. It's bad. People get permanently sick. Like there's permanent lung damage. But the numbers were thankfully way off initially from the projections. So the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that other tools can be used for clinical research. So virtual trials may become more common. I mean, we're seeing a whole new slew of virtual trials, right? Like we're seeing this every day with our DSCS site services where we get studies for sites in our network. All right, we're seeing a lot of virtual trials. We're also seeing a lot of traditional trials. So we're just seeing a lot of both. Remote monitoring will increase, but like James said in the chat, most sites, I just did my remote monitoring on a Friday because I'm a contract CRA, and it really took like 3 weeks for me to convince the site that they should do it. But they ended up doing it. Okay, and then same thing for another site. I have another site I monitor the same study. Same thing. You know, I had to like beg them, and they finally did it. But yes, it could be much more efficient if more sponsors did what we're doing, where they took their responsibility on themselves to send somebody to the site to scan documents, because that's not high value work for a site to scan documents. Okay, so the demand for enrollment will spike after this lockdown, and that's because all the studies that were supposed to start in March, April, and May have now been pushed. Yeah, did not. Now are being pushed to June, July, August. And all the studies that were initially planned for June, July, August are going to continue in June, July, August. So you're going to have like double the studies in a short period of time. So the demand for enrollment will spike. I mean, we're going to need more research-naive physicians that have healthy patient databases, like good patient databases, not healthy normal volunteers, but healthy meaning a lot of patients in their database. Okay. We're going to need more. We're going to need more physicians. First of all, there's not even enough patients with the current physicians we have in the industry. Even before coronavirus, studies are 90% delayed because of enrollment. Now it's going to be even more so. Now it's going to be even more so because the same sites are going to be competing with each other. And also, some sites that were over-leveraged closed. Like I know sites that have shut down. And they were busy sites. Okay, and that's because they got over-leveraged, but that's another webinar. That's another podcast. Okay, slide 13. We are now in startup mode in clinical research. So this is what we talked about from June to August. Chris, you can confirm this, right? You are
Absolutely.
more hands on the ground with the feasibilities than I am.
Yes, for the sites we own, I've completed feasibility questionnaires recently. Quite a few of them, at least 6.
More than usual, right?
Yep, absolutely more than usual.
Yeah, so guys, get out there on clinicaltrials.gov, get these feasibilities. Many sponsors and CROs are doing remote site selection visits. Last week, I was on a remote PSSV as a site, this time as a site. And the CRA did everything they do. It took like 2 hours. Monica was on it for 2 hours. I was on it for like 20 minutes with the PI. But they basically did everything they would do at a physical site selection visit. Monica even did a video site tour for them. Even though they didn't ask for that, Monica did it, and they really liked it. So,
yeah, excellent.
Remote, and that's a tip anyone can do right now. If you're a site, hey, figure that out. Your selling point is going to be, how can you accommodate monitors? So have somebody dedicated to scanning redacted source documents. Okay. And then what does your site look like, because we can't see it? Solve those 2 pain points. Okay, slide 14. Changes to monitoring. the way that monitors review documents may change. Exactly right. It already has changed. I don't think the industry is underestimating just how time-consuming it is to scan source documents. I think truly the only solution is to move to eSource. Okay, but most sites don't want to do that right now. Like, for some reason, it's just not mandated. I think more and more in this next decade, that will become more preferred from sponsors. And it's going to get to a point where sponsors are almost not going to give the sites the study if they don't have an eSource. I'm just predicting this right now. I don't know when it's going to be, but it's definitely going to be this decade, in my opinion. Because right now, this scanning redacted documents is not working. Right? The true solution to this is eSource. The true solution to true remote monitoring is eSource. What do you think, Chris?
I mean, certainly that makes sense. Is there any hurdles in the way of that? What are the hurdles in the way of that, though?
It's really just old habits, like sacred cows. I interviewed a futurist, a clinical research futurist, on the podcast last week, and
so
it really just boils down to old habits and like the old EDC thing, you know.
I was just going to say, it's like transferring from paper to EDC, from paper to electronic, huh?
Yeah, I mean, sites. I remember back then, sites thought that they were going to be out of jobs because everything's moving to EDC.
Right.
So now they're going to think the same thing about source. It's not the case. eSource is here to stay, guys. So that's changes to monitoring. But I do think it's way too early. I mean, less than 1% of sites use eSource. So the next couple of years, we're going to see really no difference in monitoring. But the change is here. The catalyst is here. So the infrastructures are being built. So this is what we're doing on slide 15. New scanning services may facilitate. What we're doing is really like a bridge between the old way of doing source and eSource, right? Like we're like a hybrid in between. Hey, sites don't want to switch to eSource. Okay, we're going to send a DSCS personnel to the site to scan and redact their documents and then upload them to a virtual workspace where their monitor can remote monitor. That's really what we're doing. This is not like a long-term business that we're doing, but it'll be up to us to pivot and to switch that business into something else. But for right now, for the next 2-3 years, I think it's going to be a huge demand.
Yeah, I think you're right. And
again, site budgets, okay? Increased overhead. I mean, sites don't think about what this costs for them. Having many studies is not an excuse to produce bad data. Sponsors are willing to give sites more studies so long as data quality is acceptable. So this is where you got to have your training systems in place for your coordinators, right? I mean, yes, the most important thing for most sponsors to give a site more studies is patient enrollment. But also quality is very important, because if you have bad data, and especially now in the era of remote monitoring, like you don't even redact and scan the documents. I mean, that's the same as having bad data almost. Nobody can monitor it. You're not getting paid. The site's not getting paid either for that, and the sponsor's not getting their data. Okay, so sponsors are willing to give sites more studies so long as data quality is acceptable. You talk about this all the time, Chris.
Absolutely. I mean, as you just stated, the number one criteria for a sponsor giving a site a study is enrollment. Can you get the numbers? But next, it's the quality. I mean, if the data is unusable, they don't care how many patients you enroll to change data. So it needs to be acceptable. It doesn't have to be A+ data, but so long as it's passable, acceptable. That's not to say to strive for that as a site, but you do want to strive to make sure your data is acceptable, at least that quality.
That's right. Our last slide, 17, what Carlos highlighted, okay, is probably the most important thing when it comes to when things get normal again and all these studies are going to come, you're going to, remember, you're going to now be competing with your own studies because they're going to be double the amount of studies. So you're going to have an asthma study. In the past, you may have only had one. Now you're going to have two, maybe even three, because you've done well in business development. Okay, but now you're competing amongst your own studies. So never enroll 0 patients is the the practical take-home message.
Ideally, you want to enroll at least the number you promised, if not more. That's ideal.
That's right. So you don't want to hurt your own brand for your site by taking on too many studies that you can't recruit for. It may have been better to take less studies and just focus on those. So this is why that PI thing is very important, which we started at the beginning. If you long term, the PI is the most important, I think, because they're going to be able to refer patients and refer other clinicians to refer patients. Ideally.
Yep. So just to clarify what I had stated moments ago. Again, if you promise to sponsor 10 patients, I can enroll 10 patients in this study. You want to, if you can't get the 10, if you have difficulty even getting one, get at least that one. The sponsors, they're not going to be happy with that one when you promise 10. As long as you get them that one, it's data. And they will still consider you for future studies. If you get them as 0, they may not consider you ever again. So you need to get them some data. But ideally, if you promise them 10, get them 10 if you can, or more. And they'll hastily come back to you in the future with studies, so long as the data is acceptable.
That's right. And we got one more question. And then, as always, if you guys have more questions, join us on the daily hangout. The link is in the chat. As a monitor, I can't agree anymore. eSource is going to be the way to do effectively remote monitoring. Scanning and redacting takes way too long and costly. I'm using an eSource for a study now. It's very easy. I can review any document at any time, including investigator site file. So this COVID-19 will change how we monitor moving forward. Believe me, it will happen. So there you go.
Yep.
From a full-time senior CRA. So that's it, guys. That's your opportunities in good and bad times. There are opportunities. Again, would love for everybody to join our daily quarantine meetups. The link is, if you're watching this on YouTube or the podcast, the link is below the video description. Use your web browser. Don't use the app. The AnyMeeting app is not that good for this link. They got to work on some things with the app, but the web browser will work. Okay. And thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you, Dan.
Catch you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.